Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So, if you're like me, you hate reading something, especially that by a brand that is full of a bunch of clutter. And then, if you're able to actually take the time to pour through that all, then you finally get to the crux of the piece that speaks to you. There are a lot of examples, but it's mainly those that are stuffed with words the author thinks we want to hear, as opposed to actually writing to the reader who should want to read what you have to say, since you should be helping them fix a problem. Josh Bernoff is the best selling author of 4 books, including Writing Without Bullshit, and he's a subject matter expert at helping people communicate more clearly. And on this episode, we'll discuss much better and more straightforward content, treating your reader's time more importantly than your own, eliminating weasel words, and the future of Facebook. So let's tune in to a chief troublemaker with a troubled shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Josh, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would please tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and your career to date.
Okay, so my name is Josh Bernoff. I am right now somebody who helps authors and other writers to be successful. My latest book published is called Writing Without Bullshit. And prior to that, I've spent 20 years as an analyst at Forrester Research and 14 years in startup companies in the Boston area.
So you've written a lot of books. Started pretty, 10 years ago on most of your books?
That's right. So in 2008, I published a book with Charlene Lee called Groundswell.
Yeah,
That was a
a
book about
bestseller.
social media.
Yeah.
Yes, that sold 150,000 copies. That was a excellent timing and really the first corporate book on what to do about social technologies. And since then, I've written 5 other books, some with co-authors, and 2 most recently that I actually wrote sort of on contract with other people, one on marketing and one that will be coming out soon on artificial intelligence. I love writing books. It's really the thing I do best is to work with authors and write books.
Well, as a researcher, and somebody with a background at Forrester, how did that help you become a better writer? I mean, I know obviously you've got to do a lot of research for a book, but obviously when you talk about your own book, writing without bullshit, it's more of a style guide, if you will,
Mhm.
necessarily than rather typical Forrester type content.
Well, I I spent the first 14 years of my life, as I said, in startup companies, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that was involved with writing manuals and that sort of content about technology. When I got to Forrester, though, I learned something really important. So, Forrester Research charges a pretty significant amount of money for the reports they
A
do,
little
and
bit.
you're supposed to research some topic that is pretty much unknown or unknowable, like what's the future business model for content, and then write about it. And uh, the editing there was very severe. It's like there's no good ideas in this. This is really poorly organized. I'm sorry, these are meaningless platitudes. That means things that are true, but everybody already knows them, so they don't belong in the report. And as a result of that, it was sort of a trial by fire to try and get down on the page only the most trenchant, pointed, research backed, interesting things that you could say about the topic. Um, and I eventually got pretty good at that form. I edited a lot of other analysts and sort of got them into shape on that. And I also, at that time, received over the 20 years I was at Forrester, 10,000 press releases from technology companies telling me how great they were. And that was the biggest waste of text that I have ever seen. I'd estimate that the 99.8% of everything in that I received as announcements there was useless to me. So when I left Forrester, I said, all right, I need to help people to understand how to write in a clear and pointed way, the kind of way that people might actually pay for, but that wouldn't waste their time one way or the other.
Sure.
Um, and that's really what generated Writing Without Bullshit, which is in many ways on how to write for the world where people are reading online and they're impatient, very much like the way we wrote those reports at Forrester.
Well, the other books didn't really follow exactly, I mean, this seems like a natural progression of your frustration, if you will, and a frustration that I share, especially when you read all the kinds of content that communications teams put out, or social agencies put out. But it seems more of a at heart frustration for you, for lack of a better description, than what you would have found in Outside In or Groundswell or Age of Intent. Is that
Yeah.
sort of true to speak, or?
Well, when I was at Forrester, I was writing about technology trends and
Mm-hmm.
what business should do about them. That's what research and analysis is
Sure.
at a company like that. And I love doing that. I wrote about the television industry. I wrote about the music industry. I wrote about customer experience, all sorts of things. Uh, but when I left, I said, oh, if I wanted to keep doing this, I would have just stuck around here and continued doing it. Um, so I decided to go in a different direction. I also had learned from the other books that if you write a strategy book, you can get a lot of influence, but not sell that many copies. And if you write a book that's more of a self-help productivity kind of book, here's how you can be more successful in your life. You have the potential to reach millions of people. And that was very much my objective in writing that book on writing. The two books that I wrote with other authors most recently, the artificial intelligence book and the marketing book, were very much strategy books in the same realm as what I'd done before.
Sure. Well, with Writing Without Bullshit, boost your career by saying what you mean. This one seemed to have had legs, if you will. It's from 2016, and we're
Mhm.
talking about it still a few years later. Why do you think it's resonated, and you know, is it sort of a longer term passion project of yours?
Well, I set out specifically to create something timeless. Now, that
Yeah,
sounds arrogant, but the point is that if you write a book on a technology trend, say mobile, well, in 10 years, that everything in that book is going to be obsolete.
agreed.
Um, I'll just say as an aside here that they're still assigning college students the book I co-wrote in 2008 on social media, and I feel nothing but sympathy for those poor people.
Right.
But if you look at writing, yes, there are shifts in writing, but it's something that remains relevant over time. And when I looked around at what people were using as writing manuals, there had been a shift. First of all, everyone writes online now, and yet we were all trained in a sort of method that's about reading and writing on paper. Everyone reads online, and there are all these formats that people read in emails and blog posts and tweets, uh, and even PDFs that people share that are different from we learn to write in school, essays.
Hmm.
So I thought, well, we need a sort of modern world writing manual that's designed for people with a short attention span. That the iron imperative that I talk about in there is that you must treat the reader's time as more valuable than your own. And I think that's the main problem with people's writing is they are lazy in their thinking and lazy in their writing, and it wastes the time of the people reading it. And anyone who's gotten a look at their inbox this morning knows exactly what I'm
Oh,
talking.
absolutely. Yeah, I thought that was a brilliant phrase. But why did you say boost your career by saying what you mean? In particular, without reading the book, it may look like more of a somebody looking at their own career as opposed to writing for a company.
Well, my point with that, first of all, if you have a subtitle in a book, and this is something I help authors with all the time, the subtitle has to make a promise, has to make a promise about what's in there or what you're going to get out of it.
Hmm.
And I don't want people to write better because it will improve the world. Well, I do, but that's not
Sure.
really a convincing point. I don't want them to write better because they'll be able to feel good at night. I want them to write better because it will help them to get ahead.
Yeah.
And the idea that by being more pointed and more careful in what you write, that you could actually be more of a success in your job as an independent freelancer, as an entrepreneur, whatever you want to do, that could actually help you. I didn't see enough of that in what people were passing off as writing manuals. So
Yeah.
that's why I focused on that.
Well, I also liked what you just said a little while ago when you said timeless. that sounds so much better than looking at it as evergreen, which I think is what is sort of a general phrase that people use, which means just generic goop they throw out on a page, and that's what we're tending to get most of the time.
Well, I'm shocked when we produced this. Um, I was speaking with the publisher about what to put in the marketing copy, and they
Mm-hmm.
said, "Well, we need to include the words elements of style and on writing well,
Mm-hmm.
which are the names of two writing manuals, one of which is over 50 years old, and the other of which is almost that old." Uh, I'm like, people are still using those
Right.
now. Strunk and White, which is the elements of style, is full of all sorts of great advice. But surely we've learned a few things since those books were produced, and yet that's still what people were using to teach them how to write for a world where people read on screens, and that's not what those books were originally created for.
Well, with one of the things you bring up in the book is escaping the insider syndrome, and I know that's sort of how you define it, but it's stuffing content, if you will, and I'm going to butcher this, but it's just stuffing it with keywords and BS jargon, like a lot of writers do, to
Hmm.
try to make themselves sound smarter, if you will, or just to put not necessarily sound smarter, but to put out content we think people want to read. But to me, it's not necessarily nonsensical. But when you look at the type of content that you're writing and giving advice to authors, especially from a business content standpoint, do you try to give them guidance for how to write it as a marketer for a brand, or how to write it for the consumer they're serving?
Well, I don't consider those two things to be different. The
I
first,
agree, except it seems that we're practicing it differently.
well,
You know what I
well,
mean?
there are a few things about that. First of all, before writing anything, I suggest to people that they consider four questions, um, sort of timely given that Passover's coming up. And
Sure.
the four questions about writing uh, are who are my readers? Who's the audience? Um, what is the objective? That is, what change am I trying to
Mm-hmm.
create in the readers? Because if you don't create a change in the reader, that's a waste. What's the action they're going to take? What are they going to do next? And then what is the impression they will have as a result of that? Do they think of me as smart or useful or helpful or wasteful or boring? And those four things, ROA, and then I use M for impression because it makes for a better acronym, is Rome. That's worth thinking about. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
you ask about a marketer writing, the the readers, the audience, are potential customers, and that really is the only audience that matters.
100%.
And that very much changes the way you think about jargon, because if everyone in your audience talks about, let's say, attribution in marketing, right, where the the bang comes from in your marketing dollar, if that's your audience, then you need to talk about attribution. You can't. That's not a jargon word anymore. It becomes a crucial word. But if you stuff what you're writing full of jargon words intended to impress, you just make this smaller and smaller and smaller circle of people who actually understand what those words mean. And soon you're not talking to anybody except people exactly like you. And that's not a very good audience. So that's the problem with jargon, is that it shrinks the audience down and makes people feel stupid. And that's not really effective in any kind of writing.
Could not agree more. And I just spoke about that at a couple of conferences myself, and it's one of the reason why I, to borrow part of the title of your book, I tell them that most content is shit, and
Yeah.
it's really unfortunately true. And one of the things that I've seen with brands and with all the agencies and the giant silos that brands have created with disparate teams internally or working with a lot of different agencies is that you third party too much of that to an agency that isn't really having that sort of audience centered or customer centered approach that you just described. If you had to, look into a crystal ball, do you think this can be fixed? And if you did, how do you think we go about doing that when we know that the problem is that we're still going to have a lot of
Yeah.
siloed efforts?
So I'm going to give you one strike now for having used the word third party as a verb.
Okay. Well, I
but
got two more
but
strikes
putting that
coming,
as
I'm
you
sure.
have two more strikes left, so
Yeah.
you're okay.
Yeah.
Um, if so, I write copy for people on a contract basis. It's not the main part of my business, but I do it.
By the way,
And
this is what it feels like when I talk to somebody in your neighborhood, Ann Hanley, and I feel like I'm going to get in trouble for every word that I used incorrectly. So keep going.
so no, not that many. Just nouns used as verbs. But as they say, any noun can be verbed. Anyway, uh, the when I write as an agency, would the reason people hire me is because of my ability to speak in a clear and direct way
Mm-hmm.
audiences and to clear that jargon out. I got hired last year by a company um, whose audience is chief information security officers. So these are really smart people about you know, data breaches and information security. But their descriptions of who they were written in this extremely stilted and um, obscure jargon. And I thought, yes, we can talk to these information security officers. We don't have to dumb it down to the point where it's like, we help you be safe, but we can talk to them in a sophisticated way without necessarily using a lot of jargon. And that was really the challenge. They wanted to come off as a more human kind of company, even though they were talking to some very sophisticated technical people. And that, I think, is what agencies need to do. They need to bring their expertise in writing and in communication and clarity, um, and use it to help their clients speak to their audiences in a very direct way. And that does not necessarily involve trying to add as much jargon as possible and puff things up to the point where they don't say anything.
Could not agree more. Explain, if you will, what you meant in the book about eliminating weasel words.
Okay, so that gets misunderstood frequently. Weasel words are words that are either intensifiers or qualifiers
Mm-hmm.
that don't actually mean anything. So I'll give you an example of an intensifier. The worst example is the word deeply. So if I say to you, uh, uh, Kenneth, I find your podcast to be valuable. It's like, okay, that's nice to say that. Now, suppose I say, I find your podcast to be deeply valuable.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean anything different.
Mm-hmm.
The deeply doesn't actually mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
Deeply, very, huge. These are weasel words. And then the qualifiers are words like most. Instead of us saying, millennials face challenges, we say most millennials face challenges. Well, of course, when you say millennials face challenges, we understand that that includes some and not others.
Sure.
So obviously, you wouldn't get very far in your writing if you couldn't use the word very, for example. But when you read things, and when these words pile up more and more and more, you get this idea that the person is bullshitting you. You just get this feeling in the back of your head, this is made up crap, because they have to put in a whole bunch of puffed up words to make me think that it's more powerful. So, so when I say to avoid weasel words, I'm specifically requesting that people look at these meaningless adjectives and adverbs and try and eliminate as many of them as they possibly can.
So when you told me before we started recording that you deeply believe this was the best podcast you'd ever heard, that wasn't sincere.
I don't recall saying that.
Okay, those are. Thought I'd give it a shot. So when we look at content, what types of content are you seeing marketers do the most incorrectly with the most bullshit, if you will? What are the ones that you spot the most, and what are the ones that are done incorrectly, and where do you see people succeeding with content the most?
So if you look at what people do the worst with, it's definitely press releases.
Yeah. Yes.
They're terrible, and useless.
It's like three
So
words out of 1,000 that actually say anything.
yeah, that's right. So I just wonder, in most cases, you'd be better off not having the press release. And in the cases where you do have something you need to say, you should say it as briefly as possible.
Hmm.
Um, I can point people to one of the most effective marketing pieces I ever saw, which was the piece that Tim Cook wrote when they were trying to get him to break the encryption
Hmm.
on the iPhone that belonged to the
Hmm.
terrorists in
Yep.
San Bernardino. And that's a very difficult position to take. No, I'm not going to help the FBI. I'm not going to break the encryption, even though this guy is a terrorist. But he eloquently, in about, I don't know, 600 words, explained what encryption was and why it would be a bad precedent to do
Hmm.
that. Um, and that is an effective statement as opposed to the typical, we've announced a new product and it's the greatest thing that anyone's ever seen, blah blah blah, and we have an actual customer. That's my favorite kind of useless press release. Hey, we have a customer. Whoa, congratulations. Um, I The thing I think has the most promise is content marketing, but people misunderstand that too. So in content marketing, your job is to create content that's helpful to the reader.
Hmm.
And then as a byproduct of that, they understand who you are, they find out who you are, there's inbound traffic, and they're like, oh, maybe we should work with these people.
Hmm.
And as soon as you shade over into promotional elements of that, it falls apart. So it's counterintuitive, but in content marketing, your job is not to talk about how great you are. Your job is to talk about how much you can help somebody. And as somebody who blogs 5 days a week at
Yeah.
withoutbullshit.com, I'm constantly thinking about what I can do to help people. And the ratio between posts that are about me and the stuff I do and posts that are about the customer and the challenges they have, it's about 1 in 100 posts that are about me and 99 that are about the other person's problem.
Well, you're obviously an expert. I was going to ask you about the blog. You're obviously an expert at writing without bullshit.
Mhm.
But my curiosity question, because I've been reading some of your blogs now for a
Mhm.
while, where do you get the inspiration to write that much that often?
Uh,
Because you've been doing this for how many years now? One of
four
them,
years
four
now. I have
years.
blogged every single weekday for 4 years.
Yeah.
There's over 1 million words of content on there that's gotten 2.5 million views. So,
I mean, you can pull amazing stories out of the air any night you watch the
uh,
news, but it also takes a writer to elaborate on it. Takes a
well,
you're
well,
pulling
I,
from somewhere else.
I have to talk about this because I ask myself this question
Yeah.
often. And there are certainly mornings that I wake up and say, what am I going to write about today?
Exactly.
But there are a few things. First of all, it creates a structure to my own existence. Um, at this point, my blog is me, and that means that my posting every morning is a way of my telling people, "Here I am. This is
Hmm.
who I am. This is what I think, and this is what I do." And that is important to me because otherwise, you just become beholden to whatever your latest client wants, and
Hmm.
that's not a good way for a business to run. In terms of content, there's really several sources there. One is every time somebody posts something in the news, I look at it and see if I can analyze that.
Hmm.
And my sort of bit is that I go back to original material. So if I'm going to write about William Barr's summary of the Mueller report, I'm not going to write about what CNN or the New York Times wrote about it. I'm going to go look at the actual summary and analyze that from a writing perspective. And that's sort of one hallmark of what I do is let's take apart this actual piece of writing that somebody did and understand what they're trying to do and how they succeed or fail at it. Um, the the other thing that this comes from is my own personal experience. So when I interact with clients, sometimes I just think, why do they keep making the same mistake over and over again?
Hmm.
I should write about that.
Hmm.
Um, and in particular, as I work more with authors, there are things like what should be in the first chapter of a book. It's obvious to me, but that's because I've done it a bunch of times.
Sure.
what is the skill of making an index? Uh, why is why are you not done when the manuscript is done,
Hmm.
but now you're actually at the beginning of a rewrite stage? What are ideas and where do they come from? What does it mean to have a differentiated idea? How do you come up with a good title? Um, these are all things that I work on ongoing basis with people, and I just try and put as much of the insights that gets revealed out there as I possibly can. And some days I just feel like a smartass. So we're
Sure.
recording this, and I don't know why, but I woke up this morning maybe because I'm giving a talk that has some comedy in it at this conference I'm doing. Uh, uh, anyway, um, I said, what are some funny things that I've observed lately? So the result is just a bunch of ironic stuff that I've seen.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. The conference I'm talking at is the Content Marketing Conference, and that begins, I think, on the 16th of April in Boston.
Hmm. So another thing you write about in your book, and you also talk about content in general, but you talk about email, you talk about social media, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what you wrote in the Boston Globe about Facebook's, social media broken news feed and its future.
Mhm.
You write a lot about the needed transparency with their algorithm, but elaborate, if you will, on what you wrote and what your point of view is on all this.
Yeah, so I'll say this, the real version
Mm-hmm.
of what I wrote will be appearing on my blog on Monday,
Nice.
because that's not what appeared in the paper. Um, what happened there is that they asked a bunch of people to write about a similar topic, and they got a bunch of similar things back. So they had to get us all to differentiate what we were writing. What I believe about Facebook right now is that it is both the most influential single media source in America and in American politics, and that makes it certainly subject to regulation, just like any other media company,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the least transparent and least trustworthy companies that we all deal with on a regular basis. So if you just look at the constant stream of announcements, they used our security phone numbers to allow people to target us. We deleted a bunch of Mark Zuckerberg's early posts, and they aren't accessible anymore. Um, and most recently, the fact that a whole bunch of people's data is now up on Amazon web servers that other companies have put up there. And it's just there's this constant drumbeat that demonstrates in as clear a way as possible that Facebook is not investing sufficiently in safeguarding our data. And the reason for that is because they don't think of it as our data, they think of it as their
Mm-hmm.
data.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when a company is that consistently irresponsible and has that much influence, there's a need to regulate. And I don't support what Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts,
Yeah.
suggested, which is to break it up into pieces. You just have data sharing agreements between the pieces. And even if you didn't, you just have individual pieces that could behave in a similarly irresponsible way. What we need is transparency, that they need to report on a regular basis about how they use people's data. Um, and they also need to allow us to get access to their newsfeed algorithms so that everybody from the Heritage Foundation to Common Cause can actually go in there and identify where the bias exists in those algorithms.
Well, do you think there's any chance that that's going to actually happen? I mean, even President Trump tried to expose, some of Google's algorithms, and that fell more on the political side than it did what a lot of marketers know Google or any other search engine to
Well,
be true.
well, I think when a company behaves irresponsibly with data, that there is actually some bipartisan agreement that there have to be some rules.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't. The interesting thing is that right, Silicon Valley's natural constituency is on the left liberal side of the spectrum. But now you have people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren calling for regulation of that company, and you normally would expect the conservatives to be in favor of less regulation of business, but I don't think conservatives have a soft spot in their heart for Facebook either. So I think there's definitely room for some bipartisan agreement on regulation of these companies, and it would not surprise me if it was actually possible to get some legislation through that would allow for more balance on that.
Well, so what's next for Josh? What's the next book? What's the next story that you want to tell?
Well, I I work with a very specific kind of author. So I work with nonfiction authors, mostly business authors.
Hmm.
Um, and I was surprised to learn that there is no book called How to Write a Business Book.
Wow.
It's just like that should exist. Now, I think the what I'm currently working on is not going to have that title. I'm not going to share what the title is yet because it's not settled. But I am working on a book right now which is specifically about everything that business authors need to know. How do you come up with an idea? How is that a differentiated idea? Why is it worth it to write a book, or is it not worth it to write a book? What are the different ways you can publish? How do you develop content? Um, how do you do research? What's the process? Once it gets published, how do you promote it? There's just so many questions that people have that I've been answering over and over again, and so I want to put that into the next book. Um, the book on writing that I wrote was the easiest book I ever wrote because it came directly from my personal experience, and I would hope that the same thing is going to be true here. And
Hmm.
I've been working on a speech about the same topic, which is one of the things I'll be doing at this content marketing conference. So that's it's very much fresh in my mind. So that's what will be happening next as soon as I can get enough time together myself to actually get it written.
So you do most of your work with authors, but with businesses, when they want to approach you about getting help with somebody with your skill and how to overhaul their content,
Yeah.
how do they typically approach you? And you know what's generally the goal? They just say, Josh, we need your help. Come in and fix it, or
Yeah.
what's sort of the plan that they at least set for you?
Well, there's two ways I work with companies. Uh, one way is once a company recognizes that poor writing in their organization is actually wasting a lot of people's time within the organization,
Yeah.
then they may get to the point where they say, oh, we need to actually change this element of our culture. So I work with training departments and writing departments
Hmm.
to do workshops on writing without bullshit.
Hmm.
Um, And it's funny, I did one for an insurance company here in the Boston area recently, and like the day before the event, they said, "Can you take the word bullshit out of your slides?"
Exactly.
And I said, "Well, I can, yes, but you did get copies of the book for everyone, and it says bullshit in big letters
Right.
right there on the cover." And they're like, "No, no, we'd be more comfortable." So yes, this is not just a chance for me to stand up in front of people and curse. I actually do exercises with writing from their own company so people can see how they can make a change in the stuff that they're writing.
Well, you're probably not getting a lot of requests from the diocese in Boston, are you?
No, but you'd be surprised the kind of companies I work with. I
Oh yeah.
mean, I've worked with Fidelity, I've worked with Salesforce.com. I've worked with lots of large and small organizations. I worked with a lobbying organization
Yeah.
in Washington D.C. For some reason, these people who want to learn to write without bullshit, there's more of them in Washington D.C. than anywhere else.
Yeah.
I wonder why that is.
Where bullshit's
Um,
most prevalent. Absolutely.
yeah. And the other thing I do with corporations, and I do less and less of this these days as I work more with authors, but when people have a very specific piece of copy that's very high leverage, I can help them work on that. And that's
Yeah.
often a sort of who we are. So I worked with a company that has some incredible um, audio tools
Sure.
in the Boston area. And they were like, we just need to help people to understand who we are and who we address and what we do. The same thing for the security, information security company. So if you get to the point where it's like, okay, this piece of copy is what everyone is going to see about us, that's the kind of thing that I will sometimes get involved in. I'm not writing people's email marketing because there are resources that are both better at that and cost a lot less than I do.
Sure. Well, Josh, you're not too far from the cold waters off of Boston's harbor, and I have to ask, due to the nature of the name of this show, but what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
My favorite kind of shark.
Hey, it's a
Um,
shark's perspective, so
I see.
that's my nickname.
I guess that my favorite kind of shark is a great white shark because, as I tell people, the first chapter of every book has to be to scare the hell out of you chapter.
Exactly.
And the great white shark is better at scaring the hell out of people than any other shark.
Agreed. So, well, Josh, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
No, I am terrified, but let's get going.
There you go. So, number one, Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook, because I'm a word guy, not a picture guy.
Gotcha. So, number two, the owner of America's team, the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones, or that creepy old man in your neighborhood, Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots?
Well, I think NFL football as a whole is a corrupt organization that's ruining the brains of a bunch of
Yeah,
relatively young people for a very small proportion of their lives. So, no, I am not really going to make a choice there because I think they're both involved in that corrupt organization.
that is an acceptable answer. Number three, groundswell or writing without bullshit?
Definitely writing without bullshit because if you're reading 10-year-old books on social media, you are way behind the times.
Yeah. Thank you, college students. Number
Yeah.
four, blogging every day or writing a book every year or two?
um, I'm going to answer this the way I think other people should, which is to write a book every year or two. It is much harder to blog every day than to write a book every year or two. And while I blog every weekday, I would not recommend that for most people because nobody gives a damn what you think about every day.
Well, number five, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits or cornbread? Well, I could try and dodge here and say that all carbohydrates are part of a corrupt
Yeah,
blah blah blah. But in fact,
it's the
I
gluten
love
conspiracy.
cornbread.
Yeah.
I like biscuits too, but I think if I had to choose one, I'd go with the cornbread.
Well, Josh, where can people find out more about you, read your blog, buy the book, and see where you're speaking and more?
Okay, so if you want to know more about me, the best thing to do is to head over to my website. If you're feeling adventurous, you can type withoutbullshit.com. If you're feeling a little shy, you can type bernoff.com, bernoff.com, and you'll get to exactly the same place. Um, and just sign up for my updates on my blog, and you'll get something new every in your inbox every morning. Uh, and uh, as I mentioned, I'll be speaking at the Content Marketing Conference in Boston, starting on, I believe it is the 16th of April. And I'm hoping to also be speaking at Inbound in Boston, which is a
Yeah.
conference that's coming up in September. I'll also be at the IABC, the International Association of Business Communicators, in June in Vancouver. Uh, and if people are interested in the books, if you just go and type Bernoff into the search engine at Amazon.com or Barnes and Noble, you'll be able to get a copy of the book. And due to the efforts of my partners, if you go into any airport bookstore anytime in the next 4 or 5 months, you will either see the book I wrote on marketing with two other people called Marketing to the Entitled Consumer, or a book that's about to come out on artificial intelligence, which is called The Age of Intent. That'll be out at the end of May.
Well, that's so funny because I just picked up Marketing to the Entitled Consumer at an airport. That's exactly where I saw it, and it's a fantastic book. So, as well. So, thank you so much, Josh, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
It's been great to be here. Thanks for connecting with me.
So there was my conversation with Josh Bernoff, the best-selling author of 4 books, including Writing Without Bullshit, and he's a subject matter expert at helping people communicate more clearly. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, and I quote, "You must treat the reader's time as more important than your own." It's such an amazing point of view and a problem that so many marketers are guilty of, who become lazy in their thinking and lazy in their writing. As he went on to say, just look at your inbox for proof. Second, Josh reminds us to ask these 4 questions when writing. Who are the readers and the audience? What is the objective? What is the action they're going to take? And what is the impression they will have? Third, when you look at what works and what does not, a pet peeve of mine is also how bad press releases are. To me, it's always funny, too, that those are the ones most carefully crafted by the brand and the communications team. Don't hide your point inside hundreds of words of gobbledygook, and that just has a lot of blah 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 on top of your central point. Stay out of the promotional part and focus on content that can help people. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Please do not forget that I appreciate each and every one of you. Now go write something without bullshit and don't do so much cursing in the process. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.